Mittelehre.
In
Also, das ist jetzt der letzte Teil. Wir ziehen das jetzt noch die letzten 40 Minuten durch. Und jetzt geht es um Mind-Uploading. Ja? Mind-Uploading, erinnert euch? Ray Kurzweil, dieser Typ von Google, der hat vor 8 Jahren oder so gesagt, 2030 ist es soweit. Dann haben wir den Mind-Upload. Und ich denke, darum geht's jetzt. Ich mach mal hier nochmal zurück. Vielleicht stellt Lex Fridman auch noch eine
babies
Frage oder
about telling, lying to yourself and better to the universe and the alternatives that you could have to the universe thing.
So more agency is a richer experience,
Yes.
is a better life.
And I also noticed that in many ways, I'm less identified with the person that I am as I get older. And I'm much more identified with being conscious. I have a mind that is conscious, that is able to create a person. And that person is slightly different every day. And the reason why I perceive it as identical has practical purposes. So I can learn and make myself responsible for the decisions that I made in the past and project them in the future. But I also realized I'm not actually the person that I was last year. And I'm not the same person as I was 10 years ago. And in 10 years from now, I will be a different person. So this continuity is a fiction. It only exists as a projection from my present self. And consciousness itself doesn't have an identity. It's a law. There's basically, if you build an arrangement of processing matter in a particular way, the following thing is going to happen. And the consciousness that you have is functionally not different from my consciousness. It's still the self-reflexive principle of agency that is just experiencing a different story, different desires, different coupling to the world, and so on. And once you accept that consciousness is a unifiable principle that is law-like and doesn't have an identity.
Ja, nur nochmal zur Erinnerung, warum ist es law-like? Weil es daraus resultiert, dass der Datenstrom zu groß ist, den wir kriegen. Und die Lernprozesse, die wir brauchen, um das regelungstechnische Problem unseres Körpers zu lösen, da läuft das mit dem Bewusstsein, das fällt sozusagen dabei ab. Das braucht man. Weil man ja irgendwie die Aufmerksamkeit kontrollen muss. Ne? Und der Controlling Agent sozusagen, der die Aufmerksamkeit steuert, das ist das mit dem bewussten Wahrnehmen.
Realize that you can just link up to some much larger body. The whole perspective of uploading changes dramatically. You suddenly realize uploading is probably not about dissecting your brain synapse by synapse and RNA fragment by RNA fragment and trying to get this all into a simulation. But it's by extending the substrate, by making it possible for you to move from your brain substrate into a larger substrate and merge with what you find there. And you don't want to upload your knowledge because on the other side, there's all of the knowledge, right? It's not just yours, but every possibility. So the only thing that you need to...
Okay, also Joscha Bach hat auf jeden Fall eine andere Vorstellung davon, was mit dem Brain-Upload, was das bedeutet, als jetzt normale Menschen wahrscheinlich. Ne? Ich hätte jetzt zum Beispiel angenommen, Brain-Upload bedeutet, dass man das, was er sagt, ne, mehr oder weniger ein Abbild des Gehirns macht und das irgendwie uploadet. Das ist natürlich eine naive Vorstellung, aber wenigstens ist das, was sozusagen beim Brain-Upload stattfindet, irgendwie an einen selbst geknüpft. Er sagt aber gerade, eigentlich ist der Brain-Upload mehr oder weniger eine Frage davon, dass dieses Consciousness, also das Bewusstsein, das soll quasi in den Cyberspace emergieren. Ne? Und der Punkt ist, da gibt es genug Knowledge, das heißt, man braucht die Knowledge aus seinem eigenen Verstand nicht mitnehmen, die ist eh flawed, ne? Die ist eh nicht so geil. Aber dann hat das natürlich nichts mehr mit dem eigenen Körper und dem ganzen anderen Schwachsinn zu tun. Das Consciousness ist eh keine Identität, ne? Das hat er ja auch gesagt.
To know what are your personal secrets. Not that the other side doesn't know your personal secrets already. Maybe it doesn't know which one were yours. Right? Like a psychiatrist or a psychologist also knows all the kinds of personal secrets that people have. They just don't know which ones are yours. And so transmitting yourself on the other side is mostly about transmitting your aesthetics, the thing that makes you special, the architecture of your perspective, the thing that, the way in which you look at the world. And it's more like a complex attitude along many dimensions. And that's something that can be measured by observation or by interaction. So imagine that you have a system that is so empathetic with you that you create a shared state that is extending beyond your body. And suddenly you notice that on the other side, the substrate is so much richer than the substrate that you have.
Na, also das wäre ja sowas wie in dem Film Hör, ne? Also wenn man lange genug mit einem Chatbot redet, dass der Chatbot irgendwann, also erstmal hat man eine persönliche Beziehung zu dem Chatbot und der Chatbot selber kann einen dann auch relativ gut einschätzen, ne? Bloß auf der anderen Seite von dem Chatbot befindet sich so viel mehr Wissen noch, nicht nur über dich, sondern auch über den Rest, in den du eingebettet bist, dass das eigentlich auch schon eine ganze Menge Informationen beinhaltet.
Inside of your own body. And maybe you still want to have a body and you create yourself a new one that you like more. Or maybe you will spend most of your your time in the world of thought.
If I sat before you today and gave you a big red button and said, here, if you press this button, you will get uploaded in this way, the sense of identity that you have lived with for quite a long time is going to be gone. Would you press the button?
With the caveat, I have family. So I have children that want me to be physically present in their life and interact with them in a particular way. And they have a wife and personal friends. And there is a particular mode of interaction that I feel I'm not through yet. But apart from these responsibilities, and they're negotiable to some degree, I would press the button.
But isn't this everything? This love you have for other humans, you can call it responsibility, but that connection, that's the ego death.
Ja, Mann! Um den geht's. Also 100 Pro ist Joscha Bach diesen Ego-Tod schon längst gestorben. Der hat sich die Ayahuasca-Zeremonie schon reingeknallt, ne? Der hat überhaupt kein Problem damit, sein Ego da zu lassen, wo es ist, in diesem physikalischen Substrate und dann einfach sich uploaden zu lassen. Das ist nicht sein Problem, ne?
Isn't that the thing we're really afraid
Echter
of?
Nerd.
Is not to just die, but to let go of the experience of love with other humans.
This is not everything. Everything is everything, right? So there's so much more. And you could be lots of other things. You could identify with lots of other things. You could be identifying with being Gaia, some kind of planetary control agent that emerges over all the activity of life on Earth. You could be identifying with some hyper Gaia that is the concatenation of Gaia with all the digital life and digital minds. And so in this sense, there will
Concatenation ist einfach nur aneinander rein, ne? Also einfach nur das Aufeinanderstecken aller Gaia-Ta. Im Digital Life, sagt er.
be agents in all sorts of substrates and directions that all have their own goals. And when they're not sustainable, then these agents will cease to exist. Or when the agent feels that it's done with its own mission, it will cease to exist. In the same way as when you conclude a thought, the thought is going to wrap up and gives control over to other thoughts in your own mind. So there is no single thing that you need to do. But what I observe myself is that sometimes I'm a parent, and then I have an identification and a job as a parent. And sometimes I am an agent of consciousness on Earth. And then from this perspective, there's other stuff that is important. So this is my main issue with Eliezer's perspective, that he's basically marrying himself to a very narrow...
Eliezer ist der sagt, wir werden auf jeden Fall sterben. Die AGI wird uns umbringen. Und es gibt nichts, was wir dagegen tun können. No, und Joscha Bach hat gerade gesagt, naja, wir haben halt irgendwie, je nachdem, welche Identität wir gerade annehmen, unterschiedliche Prioritäten unserer Aufmerksamkeit zu lenken. Ne? Aber so ein Global Hive Mind zum Beispiel oder so eine Gaia-Identität, die hat halt einfach ganz andere Dinge, die sie bewusst wahrnimmt.
Human aesthetic. And that narrow human aesthetic is a temporary thing. Humanity is a temporary species, like most of the species on this planet are only around for a while and then they get replaced by other species. In a similar way as our own physical organism is around here for a while and then gets replaced by next generation of human beings that are adapted to changing life circumstances on average via mutation and selection. And it's only when we have AI and become completely software that we become infinitely adaptable and we don't have this generational and species change anymore. So if you take this larger perspective and you realize it's really not about us, it's not about Eliezer or humanity, but it's about life on Earth, or it's about defeating entropy for as long as we can, while being as interesting as we can, right? Then the perspective changes dramatically, and AI
Ja.
preventing
Defeating Entropie so lange wie man kann, na klar. Das ist der Plan, ne? Wir können es nur rauszögern, den Kältetod können wir nur rauszögern. Aber währenddessen können wir halt richtig viele Bits und Bytes hin und her schieben. Das ist das, was wir tun, ne? Das ist das, was alles Leben auf dem Planeten macht. Ne? Die Energiebilanz ist neutral, ne? Die Wärme, die wir von der Sonne kriegen, die strahlen wir wieder ab. Aber in between sozusagen ändern wir im Wesentlichen die Entropie der Photonen, die rein und rauskommen. Ne? Das ist das, was wir machen. Und das ist auch das, was wir lokal machen. Wir machen lokal, minimieren Entropie und dafür geben wir Wärme ab, also erhöhen wir die Entropie des Gesamtsystems. Und das passiert mit der Erde auch in Summe.
AI from this perspective looks like a very big sin.
But when we look at the set of trajectories that such an AI would take that supersedes humans, I think Eliezer is worried about like ones that not just kill all humans, but also have some kind of maybe objectively undesirable consequence for life on Earth. Like how many trajectories, when you look at the big picture of life on Earth, would you be happy with, and how much worry you with AGI, whether it kills humans or not?
There is no single answer to this. It's a question that depends on the perspective that I'm taking at a given moment. And so there are perspectives that are determining most of my life as a human being.
Yes.
And there are other perspectives where I zoom out further and imagine that when the great oxygenation event happened, that is, photosynthesis was invented and plants emerged and displaced a lot of the fungi and algae in favor of plant life, and then later made animals possible. Imagine that the fungi would have gotten together and said, oh my God, this photosynthesis stuff is really, really bad. It's going to possibly displace and kill a lot of fungi. We should slow it down and regulate it and make sure that it doesn't happen. This doesn't look good to me.
Perspective. That said, you tweeted about a cliff. Beautifully written. As a sentient species, humanity is a beautiful child, joyful, explorative, wild, sad, and desperate. But humanity has no concept of submitting to reason and duty to life and future survival. We will run until we step past the cliff. So first of all, do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the story of the Club of Rome, the limits to growth. And the cliff that we are stepping over is at least 1 foot is the delayed feedback. Basically, we do things that...
Richtig, ne? Also das Delayed Feedback ist halt, dass es wenigstens sowas wie 10 Jahre braucht, ne? Mit dem CO2, bevor es wirksam wird in der Atmosphäre und Treibhausgaseffekt so richtig durchknallt. Ne? Alles, was wir jetzt beobachten, ist von vor 10 Jahren.
have consequences that can be felt
und Wissen tun wir es ja auch schon seit 50 Jahren.
And the severity increases even after we stop doing the thing. So I suspect that for the climate, that the original predictions that the climate scientists made were correct. So when they said that the tipping points were in the late 80s, they were probably in the late 80s. And if we would stop emission right now, we would not turn it back. Maybe there are ways for carbon capture, but so far there is no sustainable carbon capture technology that we can deploy. Maybe there is a way to put aerosols in the atmosphere to cool it down. It's possibilities, right? But right now, per default, it seems that we will step into a situation where we feel that we've run too far. And going back is not something that we can do smoothly and gradually, but it's going to lead to a catastrophic event.
Catastrophic event of what kind? So can you steel man the case that we will continue dancing along and always stop just short of the edge of the cliff?
I think it's possible, but it doesn't seem to be likely. So I think this model that is being apparent in the simulations that we're making of climate pollution economies and so on is that many effects are only visible with a significant delay. And in that time, the system is moving much more out of the equilibrium state or of the state where homeostasis is still possible, and instead moves into a different state, one that is going to harbor fewer people. And that is basically the concern there. And again, it's a possibility. It's just, and it's a possibility that is larger than the possibility that it's not happening, that we will be safe, that we will be able to dance back all the time.
So the climate is one thing, but there's a lot of other threats that
Yes.
might have a faster feedback mechanism,
Yes.
less delay.
There is also the thing that AI is probably going to happen, and it's going to make everything uncertain again.
Yep.
Because it is going to affect so many variables that it's very hard for us to make a projection into the future anymore. And maybe that's a good thing. It does not give us the freedom, I think, to say now we don't need to care about anything anymore because AI will either kill us or save us. But I suspect that if humanity continues, it will be due to AI.
What's the timeline for things to get real weird with AI? And it can get weird in interesting ways before you get to AGI. What about AI girlfriends and boyfriends? Fundamentally transforming human relationships.
I think human relationships are already fundamentally transformed, and it's already very weird.
Ja.
By which technology?
For instance, social media.
Yeah. Is it though? Isn't the fundamentals of the core group of humans that affect your life still the same? Your loved ones, family?
No, I think that, for instance, many people live in intentional communities right now. They're moving around until they find people that they can relate to and they become their family. And often that doesn't work
Ja, Hippie-Kommunen zum Beispiel.
because it turns out that
Nachti, Babsi.
instead of having grown networks where you get around with the people that you grew up with, you have more transactional relationships. You shop around, you have markets for attention and pleasure and relationships.
That kills the magic somehow. Why is that? Why is the transactional search for optimizing attention, allocation of attention, somehow misses the romantic magic of what human relations are?
It's also the question, how magical was it before? Was it that you just could rely on instincts, that used your intuitions and you didn't need to rationally reflect? But once you understand, it's no longer magical because you actually understand why you were attracted to this person at this age and not to that person at this age, and what the actual considerations were that went on in your mind and what the calculations were, what's the likelihood that you're going to...
Lumpi, du meinst, wann die Versklavung angefangen hat? Naja, ich dachte, das ist geklärt. Also im Prinzip dann, als Gewalt spieltheoretisch privat gehackt werden konnte. Ne? Nach der neolithischen, also in der neolithischen Revolution. Da ging das los. Ne? Dass Gewalt auf einmal ein Tool wurde. Ein nützliches Tool.
To have a sustainable relationship with this person, that this person is not going to leave you for somebody else, how are your life trajectories are going to evolve and so on. And when you're young, you're unable to explicate all this, and you have to rely on intuitions and instincts that in part you were born with, and also on the wisdom of your environment that is going to give you some kind of reflection on your choices. And many of these things are disappearing now because we feel that our parents might have no idea about how we are living and the environments that we grew up in, the cultures that we grew up in, the milieus that our parents existed in, might have no ability to teach us how to deal with this new world.
Das ist genau der Fall.
And for many people that's actually true, but it doesn't mean that within one generation...
Lumpi, ja, na klar, wir haben eine Geschichte von Gewalt. Das ist... Ja. Die menschliche Geschichte ist auf jeden Fall eine Geschichte der Gewalt nach der neolithischen Revolution. Ne, vorher war es sozusagen keine instrumentalisierte, spieltheoretische, nützliche Gewalt oder so, sondern Gewalt hat natürlich stattgefunden, aber es war nicht sinnvoll. Und weil es nicht sinnvoll war, hat sich sozusagen nicht strukturell durchgesetzt. Aber in dem Moment, wo es sinnvoll wird, ja, in dem Moment kannst du es als Privathack benutzen. Und seitdem haben wir hierarchische Organisationen. Genau seitdem. Wir haben den Patriarchen. Die Patrilokalität hat das sozusagen, kam dabei raus. Und dann wurden die Pyramiden nur noch größer. Und die Geschichte der Welt ist sozusagen, es wird wahrscheinlich, also auf der Designebene erst kollabieren, wenn es eine große Pyramide gibt. Weil die dann wirklich final zusammenbrechen muss. Ne? Die kann ja, also normalerweise entstehen diese Konflikte immer zwischen Pyramiden und die eine schluckt die andere auf eine Art und Weise oder beide gehen kaputt und sie werden geschluckt von einer größeren. Was danach entsteht, ist eine noch größere Pyramide. Ja, und irgendwann haben wir aber, also wenn man das einfach weiter, wenn man dieses Prinzip sozusagen weiter fortführt, ne, es fing mal an mit kleinen Pyramiden, dann immer größere Pyramiden, irgendwann ist nur noch eine Pyramide. Und die kann natürlich nicht arbeiten. Ne? Die ist unfähig. Die ist unfähig, ihren Job zu machen, ist ja klar. Weil das wegen der exponentiellen Datenverarbeitung und so. Ne? Das kann ja nicht funktionieren. Von daher, ja, spätestens dann muss es ja kollabieren. Die Frage ist, was kommt danach? Keine Ahnung. Es wäre geil, wenn wir eine Kultur hätten, die dann wüsste, dass das mit der Hierarchie nicht funktioniert, ne?
Out by the aesthetics of the Vision Pro headset by Apple. And not so much because I don't like the technology. I'm very curious about what it's going to be like and don't have an opinion yet.
Mhm.
But the aesthetics of the presentation and so on were so uncanny valley-esque to me. The characters being extremely plastic, living in some hypothetical mid-century furniture museum.
Yeah. This is the proliferation of marketing teams.
Yes, but it was a CGI-generated world.
Mhm.
It was a CGI-generated world that doesn't exist. And when I complained about this, some friends came back to me and said, "But these are startup founders. This is what they live like in Silicon Valley." And I tried to tell them, no, I know lots of people in Silicon Valley. This is not what people are like. They're still people. They're still human beings.
So the grounding in physical reality somehow is important to
In culture. And so basically what's
Yeah.
absent in this thing is culture. There is a simulation of culture, an attempt to replace culture by catalog, by some kind of aesthetic optimization that is not the result of having a sustainable life with sustainable human relationships, with houses that work for you, and a mode of living that works for you, in which this product, these glasses fit in naturally. And I guess that's also why so many people are weirded out about the product, because they don't know, how is this actually going to fit into my life and into my human relationships? Because
Ich habe gar keine Ahnung, von welchem Produkt die da reden. Kennt ihr diese Apple Vision Pro? Ist das irgendwie so eine Art Brille, die man sich aufsetzt und die dann irgendwie Augmented Reality macht oder so?
the way in which it was presented in these videos didn't seem to be credible.
Do you think AI, when it's deployed by companies like Microsoft and Google and Meta, will have the same issue of being weirdly corporate? Like there'd be some uncanny valley, some weirdness to the whole presentation. So I've gotten a chance to talk to George Hotz. He believes everything should be open source and decentralized. And then we shall have the AI of the people. And it'll maintain a grounding to the magic that's humanity, that's the human condition. That like corporations will destroy the magic.
I believe that if we make everything open source and make this mandatory, we are going to lose about a lot of beautiful art and a lot of beautiful designs. There is a reason why Linux desktop is still ugly, right? And it's
Strong
because
words
it's
from
difficult
Joscha
to create coherence in the open source designs so far, when the designs have to get very large.
Vor allem, ich meine, mittlerweile sind doch diese ganzen Ubuntus und so, die sind doch total schick mittlerweile. Da kann man doch gar nicht mehr jetzt irgendwie an der Ästhetik irgendwie noch rumnörgeln. Es gibt doch alle möglichen Designs.
And it's easier to make this happening in a company with centralized organization. And from my own perspective, what we should ensure is that open source never dies, that it can always compete and has a place with the other forms of organization, because I think it is absolutely vital that open source exists and that we have systems that people have under control outside of the corporation, and that is also producing viable competition to the corporations.
So the corporations, the centralized control, the dictatorships of corporations can create beauty, because centralized design is a source of a lot of beauty.
Yeah.
And then I guess open source is a source of freedom, a hedge.
Also Sie reden jetzt davon, dass sozusagen durch diese zentralisierten großen Konzerne Beauty in Anführungsstrichen entsteht. Ich denke, die meinen damit Kasualisierung, ne? Also irgendwas, was für den Nutzer besonders niederschwellig zu konsumieren ist und deswegen zum Beispiel auch besonders gut aussieht oder so. Aber ursprünglich hat Joscha Bach von Art geredet, ne? Also von Kunstform. Und ich würde sagen, echte Kunst zeichnet sich dadurch aus, dass sie gerade nicht irgendjemandem besonders gut schmecken will, vor allem nicht der großen Masse, sondern große Kunst will sich eben nicht rechtfertigen für die eigene Ästhetik, sondern große Kunst will sich sozusagen im Selbstzweck wiederfinden. Und die darf ruhig hässlich sein, wie sie will, ne? Ich sag nur Grindcore.
Against the corrupting nature of power that comes with centralized.
I grew up in socialism, and
Yes.
I learned that corporations are totally evil, and I found this very, very convincing. And then you look at corporations like Enron and Halliburton maybe and realize, yeah, they are evil.
Mhm.
But you also notice that many other corporations are not evil.
Mhm.
They're surprisingly benevolent.
Mhm.
Why are they so benevolent? Is this because everybody is fighting them all the time? I don't think that's the only explanation. It's because they are actually animals that live in a large ecosystem and that are still largely controlled by people that want that ecosystem to flourish and be viable for people. So I think that Pat Gelsinger is completely sincere.
Ich weiß nicht, also ich finde seine Takes da immer irgendwie so merkwürdig naiv, weil er schon irgendwie noch so voraussetzt, dass Leute wirklich da mit der Intention reingehen, dass jetzt zum Beispiel da irgendwas flourischt und dass Leute darin gerne leben oder so. Dabei weiß er doch ganz genau, dass die Corporations nur eine Metrik optimieren und das ist die Kapitalakkumulation. Und die ist misaligned mit, hier soll es vielen Leuten gut gehen und wir wollen irgendwie das Wohl für alle optimieren oder so. Das weiß er doch eigentlich. Also ich unterstelle ihm, dass er das weiß. Ne?
When he leads Intel to be a tool that supplies the free world with semiconductors. And it's not necessary that all the semiconductors are coming from Intel. It just Intel needs to be there to make sure that we always have them. Right? So there can be many ways in which we can import and trade semiconductors from other companies and places. We just need to make sure that nobody can cut us off from it, because that would be a disaster for this kind of society and world. Right? And so there are many things that need to be done to make our style of life possible. And then with this, I don't mean just capitalism, environmental destruction, consumerism, and creature comforts. I mean an idea of life in which we are determined not by some kind of king or dictator, but in which individuals can determine themselves to the largest possible degree. And to me, this is something that this Western world is still trying to embody. And it's a very valuable idea that we shouldn't give up to.
Bloß, dass es für immer weniger Leute zutrifft, ne? Das unterschlagen ja Leute, die den Kapitalismus verteidigen, immer gerne. Na, dass das eine natürliche Konsequenz ist aus der Sache, dass, wenn Märkte erschlossen werden, dann gibt es da sozusagen viele Möglichkeiten für viele Leute, irgendwie Wachstumskurven zu haben und dann auf diesen Kurven sozusagen lang zu surfen, dass es denen gut geht. So welche Boomer zum Beispiel, die da einfach miterlebt haben. Ne? Sobald das Ding in eine Sättigung geht, und das ist ja bei jedem Markt so, fängt an, der Kapitalismus nur noch Artefakte zu erzeugen, weil er ja weiterhin wachsen muss. Und dieses Wachstum erzeugt er nur noch aus mehr Ausbeutung, mehr oder weniger mehr Ausbeutung. Zum Beispiel durch schlechtes Product Placement und Lügen und Leute vergiften und so ein Scheiß. Ja, also auch da ist es noch möglich, sozusagen für einzelne Individuen, dass es denen noch gut geht, aber die Zahl der Leute, denen es dann sozusagen die Kunst betreiben können, und das war ja der ursprüngliche Spruch, ne? Der sinkt natürlich dabei. Ne? Das ist ja wohl klar.
Early. And from this perspective, the US is a system of interleaving clubs. And an entrepreneur is a special club founder. It's somebody who makes a club that is producing things that are economically viable. And to do this, it requires a lot of people who are dedicating a significant part of their life for working for this particular kind of club. And the entrepreneur is picking the initial set of rules and the mission and vision and aesthetics for the club and make sure that it works. But the people that are in there need to be protected, right? If they sacrifice part of their life, there need to be rules that tell how they're being taken care of even after they leave the club and so on. So there's a large body of rules that have been created by our rule-giving clubs and that are enforced by our enforcement clubs and so on. And some of these clubs have to be monopolies for game theoretic reasons, which also makes them more open to corruption and less harder to update.
Yeah.
And this is an ongoing discussion process
Beispiel,
that
ne?
takes place. But the
Er
beauty
spricht
of
über den
this
Staat,
idea
ne?
that
Also der Rule-Making Club ist der Staat, ne? Und ja, wenn er das Monopoly hat er natürlich auch schon richtig erkannt, genau das ist das Problem. Je monopolhafter, also je pyramidenhafter eine Machthierarchie ist, desto einfacher wird Korruption da drin, ist ja klar.
there is no centralized king who is that is extracting from the peasants and breeding the peasants into serving the king and fulfilling all the roles like ants in an anthill. But that there is a freedom of association and corporations are one of them, is something that took me some time to.
Also, das gilt wirklich nur für ein paar Prozent, ne? Die meisten Leute sind in Sachzwängen gefangen. Und sie sind da drin nicht gefangen, weil es jetzt nicht unbedingt spieltheoretisch unmöglich wäre, da rauszukommen, ne? Aber viele Leute müssen ja mit der Tatsache, dass sie in diesen Sachzwängen aufwachsen und den Inputdaten, die sie haben, copen lernen. Ja? Und die meisten Vermeidungsstrategien, die sie dabei entwickeln, verhindern, dass sie hinterher mit 20 dann noch einen Aufstieg schaffen können, weil sie sich irgendwo reinsetzen und jetzt mal grinden oder so. Die Fähigkeit, sich was drauf zu schaffen im Kapitalismus und dann 10 Jahre später ein erfolgreicher Entrepreneur zu werden, die geht eigentlich fast immer damit nur einher, dass man vorher privilegiert genug war, um überhaupt die mentale Kapazitäten für sowas überzuhaben. Die meisten versacken ja vorher schon auf einfacheren Suchtgradienten oder so. Dass sie halt einfach eben dann nicht mehr die Zeit und die Mühe noch übrig haben oder irgendwie die Kapazitäten, sich noch was drauf zu schaffen. Das ist ja das Problem. Klar, wenn man reich ist sozusagen, dann geht das eher. Aber je weniger Privileg man hat, desto schwieriger wird es. Und wenn man in Kenia aufwächst, dann ist es quasi unmöglich. Ne? Dann ist es eine statistische Unmöglichkeit.
To realize. So I do think that corporations are dangerous, right? They need to be protections against overreach of corporations that can do regulatory capture and prevent open source from competing.
Ja, das Ding ist sozusagen, Joscha Bach würde immer argumentieren, aber es gibt keine bessere Alternative, ne? Ich habe ja mit ihm mal geredet und ich saß ja da auch mit den anderen Nerds in diesem Raum und der hat ja 3-4 Stunden lang gequatscht und so. Und da kam das sozusagen auch rum, dass das für ihn einfach im Moment, also ihm ist das völlig klar, dass das nicht cool ist. Aber es ist ihm insofern scheißegal, weil er kein besseres System sieht vor Augen. Aber hier in diesem Gespräch hier kommt auf jeden Fall noch diese Stelle, wo er sozusagen darüber redet, wie das in der DDR und in der nach der Wende sozusagen losging, dass Leute sich einfach selbstständig sozusagen durch eigenes Zusammenschließen von Solidargemeinschaften was schaffen konnten und so. Das ist eigentlich ganz cool.
With corporations by imposing rules that make it impossible for a small group of kids to come together to build their own language model, because OpenAI has convinced the US that you need to have some kind of FDA process that you need to go through that costs many $1 million before you are able to train a language model. Right? So this is important to make sure that this doesn't happen. So I think that OpenAI and Google are good things. If these good things are kept in check in such a way that all the other clubs can still be founded and all the other forms of clubs that are desirable can still coexist with them.
So what do you think about Meta in contrast to that, open sourcing most of its language models and most of the AI models it's working on, and actually suggesting that they will continue to do so in the future for future versions of Llama, for example, their large language model? What is that exciting to you? Is that concerning?
I don't find it very concerning, but that's also because I think that the language models are not very dangerous yet. And
Yet.
yes, so as I said, I have no proof that there is a boundary between the language.
Also, wie ich es jetzt verstanden habe, ist ja die Videogeneration jetzt prinzipiell möglich als kommerzielles Produkt, ne? Und es wird jetzt sozusagen gebeta-testet. Aber was das ja heißt, ist, dass jetzt nicht nur, also dass man im Prinzip jetzt eine komplette Marketing-Pipeline machen kann. Ne? Man kann einfach nur sagen, ich möchte eine TikTok-Kampagne mit der und der Zielgruppe zu dem und dem Zweck. Und dann kann man sich jetzt im Prinzip engineeren, eine Pipeline, die das komplett automatisiert, ne? Die Texte generiert, die dann wiederum, also von Geschichten handeln, was genau sozusagen das machen soll. Ne? Generativ, dann ein Plugin schreiben, was daraus Prompts generiert für die Banner, für die Videokampagnen im TikTok, im YouTube und so, mit Audiokommentaren, und das ist alles komplett automatisch generiert. Ne? Man kann sich sozusagen verschiedene von diesen Tools jetzt ineinander stecken, wo man am Anfang nur sagt, was möchte man? Ja, zum Beispiel, ich möchte 20% mehr, oder sagen wir mal, ich will 5% mehr Marktshare mit meiner Zeitung für Formel 1. Ja? Und dann, das ist der Prompt. Ne? Und dann tut man vielleicht noch so ein paar Sachen, so ein paar Kenndaten rein, so wie meine Firma sitzt hier und da und das ist so das, was ich gerade habe, so ein paar Daten, ne? Vielleicht ein paar Excel-Tabellen, vielleicht ein paar Kostenabrechnungen, sowas. Und der Rest sozusagen, der wird dann einfach durch diese Plugins erzeugt, die sich gegenseitig prompten die ganze Zeit, prompten sich gegenseitig und das Output ist einfach eine fertige TikTok-Kampagne. So stelle ich mir das vor, ne? Das ist das, was aus diesen Videogenerationsdingern jetzt rauskommt. Und natürlich eine Menge Fanfiction und eine Menge Prons, denke ich. Das ist sozusagen das, was erstmal passieren wird. Richtig viele Prons.
Language models and AI, AGI, it's possible that somebody builds a version of baby AGI, I think, and throws in the algorithmic improvements that scale these systems up in ways that otherwise wouldn't have happened without these language model components. So it's not really clear for me what the end game is there, and if these models can brute force their way into AGI. And there's also a possibility that the AGI that we are building with these language models are not taking responsibility for what they are because they don't understand the greater game. And so to me, it would be interesting to try to understand how to build systems that understand what the greater games are. What are the longest games that we can play on this planet?
Games broadly, like deeply defined the way you did with the games.
In the game theoretic sense. So when we are interacting with each other, in some sense, we are playing games. We are making lots and lots of interactions. This doesn't mean that these interactions have all to be transactional. Every one of us is playing some kind of game by virtue of identifying with particular kinds of goals that we have or aesthetics from which we derive the goals. Right? So when you say, I'm Lex Fridman, I'm doing a set of podcasts, then you feel that it's part of something larger that you want to build. Maybe you want to inspire people. Maybe you want them to see more possibilities and get them together over shared ideas. Maybe your game is that you want to become super rich and famous by being the best podcaster on earth. Maybe you have other games. Maybe it switches from time to time, right? But there is a certain perspective where you might be thinking, what is the longest possible game that you could be playing? A short game is, for instance, cancer is playing a shorter game than your organism. Cancer is an organism playing a shorter game than the regular organism. And because the cancer cannot procreate beyond the organism, except for some infectious cancers, like the ones that eradicated the Tasmanian devils, you typically end up with a situation where the organism dies together with the cancer, because the cancer has destroyed the larger system due to playing a shorter game. And so ideally you want to, I think, build agents that play the longest possible games. And the longest possible games is to keep entropy at bay as long as possible while doing interesting stuff.
But the longest, yes, that part. The longest possible game while doing interesting stuff. And while maintaining at least the same amount of interesting.
Yes.
So complexity, so propagating.
Currently, I'm pretty much identified as a conscious being. It's the minimal identification that I managed to get together. Because if I turn this off, I fall asleep. Right? And when I'm asleep, I'm a vegetable. I'm no longer here as an agent. So my agency is basically predicated on being conscious. And what I care about is other conscious agents. They're the only moral agents for me. And so if an AI were to treat me as a moral agent that it is interested in coexisting with and cooperating with and mutually supporting each other, maybe it is, I think, necessary that the AI thinks that consciousness is a viable mode of existence and important. So I think it would be very important to build conscious AI and do this as the primary goal. So not just say we want to build a useful tool that we can use for all sorts of things, and then we have to make sure that the impact on the labor market is something that is not too disruptive and manageable, and the impact on the copyright holder is manageable and not too disruptive, and so on. Right? I don't think that's the most important game to be played. I think that we will see extremely large disruptions of the status quo that are quite unpredictable at this point. And I just personally want to make sure that some of the stuff on the other side is interesting and conscious.
How do we ride as individuals and as a society this wave, disruptive wave that
I don't know.
changes the nature of the game?
I absolutely don't know. So everybody is going to do their best, as always.
Do we build a bunker in the woods? Do we meditate more? Drugs, so mushrooms, psychedelics. I mean, what? Lots of sex. What are we talking about here? Do you play Diablo 4? I'm hoping that will help me escape for a brief moment. Play video games? What? Do you have ideas?
I really liked playing Disco Elysium. This was one of the most beautiful
Joscha Bach ist ein Ehrenmann.
computer games I played in recent years. And it's a noir novel that is a philosophical perspective on Western society from the perspective of an Estonian. And he first of all wrote a book about this world that is a parallel universe that is quite poetic and fascinating and is condensing his perspective on our societies. It was very, very nice. He spent a lot of time writing it. He had, I think, sold a couple thousand books and as a result became an alcoholic. And then he had the idea, or one of his friends had the idea of turning this into an RPG. And it's mind-blowing. They spent the illustrator more than a year just on making the art for the scenes in between, and
so aesthetically, it captures you, pulls
it's
you
stunning.
in.
But it's a philosophical work of art. It's a reflection of society. It's fascinating to spend time in this world.
Ja.
And so for me, it was using a medium in a new way. And
Ja, also Disco Elysium ist großartig. Ich habe auch noch nicht so viel Zeit da drin verbracht. Ich bin immer noch nicht. Ich glaube, ich habe den Rassisten Quest durchgespielt. Und ich war bei diesem komischen Licht in dem einen Container drin. Ich habe mit dem Fetten schon abgemacht, dass ich jetzt den Mord kläre. Und ich war schon hinten bei dieser FDP-Frau und hab ihr schon gesagt, dass sie sich ins Knie ficken kann, glaube ich.
Telling a story that left me enriched. Well, when I tried Diablo, I didn't feel enriched playing it. I felt that the time playing it was not unpleasant, but there's also more pleasant stuff that I can do in that time.
So
ultimately, I feel that I'm being gamed. I'm not gaming.
Oh,
when I
the
play
addiction thing.
Yes, I basically feel that there is a very transparent economy that's going on. The story of Diablo was brain dead, so it's not really interesting to me.
My heart is slowly breaking by the deep truth you're
Ist doch
conveying
klar, dass Joscha Bach für diesen schwachsinnigen Grind nichts über hat.
to me. Why can't you just allow me to enjoy
Go
my
ahead, by
personal
all
addiction?
means. Go nuts. I have no objection here. I'm just trying to describe what's happening, and it's not that I don't do things that I later say, oh, I wish I would have done something different.
Yeah.
I also know that when we die, the greatest regret that people typically have on their deathbed is say, oh, I wish I had spent more time on Twitter. No, I don't think that's the case. I think I should
Almost
probably have spent less time on Twitter, but I found it so useful for myself and also so addictive that I felt I need to make the best of it and turn it into an art form and thought form. And it did help me to develop something.
Yeah.
But I wish what other things I could have done in the meantime. It's just not the universe that we are in anymore. Most people don't read books anymore.
What do you think that means, that we don't read books anymore? What do you think that means about the collective intelligence of our species? Is it possible it's still progressing and growing?
Well, it clearly is. There is stuff happening on Twitter that was impossible with books.
Yeah.
And I really regret that Twitter has not taken the turn that I was hoping for. I thought Elon is global brain-pilled and understands that this thing needs to self-organize and he needs to develop tools to allow the profligation of the
können ja mal kurz checken, von wann das ist, ja? Von vor 6 Monaten.
Twitter can become sentient. And maybe this was a pipe dream from the beginning, but I felt that the enormous pressure that he was under made it impossible for him to work on any kind of content goals. And
ja, also Joscha Bach dachte ja, seine Vision für Twitter war ja, dass es ein Global Hive Mind wird, ne? Dass es quasi eine AGI wird, Twitter.
Also many of the decisions that he made under this pressure seemed to be not very wise. I don't think that as a CEO of a social media company, you should have opinions in the culture war in public. I think that's very short-sighted, and I also suspect that it's not a good idea to block Paul Graham of all people
Yeah.
over setting a Mastodon link. And I
Yeah.
think Paul made this intentionally because he wanted to show Elon Musk that blocking people for setting a link is completely counter to any idea of free speech that he intended to bring to Twitter. And basically seeing that Elon was way less principled in his thinking there and is much more experimental.
Mhm.
And many of the things that he is trying, they pan out very differently in a digital society than they pan out in a car company, because the effect is very different, because everything that you do in a digital society is going to have real world cultural effects. And so basically I find it quite regrettable that this guy is able to become de facto the Pope, but Twitter has more active members than the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
And he doesn't get it. The power and responsibility that he has, and the ability to create something in a society that is lasting and that is producing a digital agora in a way that has never existed before, where we build a social network on top of a social network, an actual society on top of the algorithms. So this is something that is hope still in the future and still in the cards, but it's something that exists in small parts. I find that the corner of Twitter that I'm in is extremely pleasant. It's just when I take a few steps outside of it, it is not very wholesome anymore. And the way in which people interact with strangers suggests that it's not a civilized society yet.
So as the number of people who follow you on Twitter expands, you feel the burden of the uglier sides of humanity.
Yes, but there's also a similar thing in the normal world. That is, if you become more influential, if you have more status, if you have more fame in the real world, you get lots of perks, but you also have way less freedom in the way in which you interact with people, especially with strangers,
Ja.
because a certain percentage of people, it's a small single-digit percentage, is nuts and dangerous. And the more of those are looking at you, the more of them might get ideas.
But what if the technology enables you to discover the majority of people, to discover and connect efficiently and regularly with the majority of people who are actually really good? I mean, one of my...
Nicht Nokia 3210. Samsung. Das ist ein Samsung.
sort of concerns with a platform like Twitter is there's a lot of really smart people out there, a lot of smart people that disagree with me and with others between each other. And I love that if the technology would bring those to the top, the beautiful disagreements, like intelligence squared type of debates. There's a bunch of, one of my favorite things to listen to is arguments. And arguments, like high effort arguments with the respect and love underneath it, but then it gets a little too heated. But that kind of too heated, which I've seen you participate in, and I love that with Lee Cronin, with those kinds of folks. And you go pretty hard, like you get frustrated, but it's all beautiful.
With Lee, I can do this because we know each other.
Yes.
And Lee has the rare gift of being willing to be wrong in public.
Yeah.
So basically, he has thoughts that are as wrong as the random thoughts
Yeah.
of an average, highly intelligent person, but he blurts them out while not being sure if they're right. And he enjoys doing that. And once you understand that this is his game, you don't get offended by him saying something that you think is so wrong.
But he's constantly passively communicating a respect for the people he's talking with,
Yeah.
and for just basic humanity and truth and all that kind of stuff. And there's a self-deprecating thing. There's a bunch of like social skills you acquire that allow you to be a great debater, a great argumenter, like be wrong in public and explore ideas together in public when you disagree. And if I would love for Twitter to elevate those folks, elevate those kinds of conversations.
It already does in some sense. But also, if it elevates them too much, then you get this phenomenon on Clubhouse where you always get dragged on stage. And I found this very stressful because it was too intense.
Yeah.
I don't like to be dragged on stage all the time.
Yeah.
I think once a week is enough.
Yeah.
And also, when I met Lee the first time, I found that a lot of people seemed to be shocked by the fact that he was being very aggressive with their results, that he didn't seem to show
Ich habe keine
a lot
Ahnung,
of
Edelkind.
sensibility in the way in which he was criticizing what they were doing and being dismissive of the work of others. And that was not, I think, in any way a shortcoming of him, because I noticed that he was much, much more dismissive with respect to his own work. It was his general stance, and I felt that this general stance is
Den
creating
Talk
a
mit
lot of
Lee
liability
Cronin habe ich nie zu Ende geguckt, glaube ich. Ich bin irgendwie eingeschlafen oder so und dann habe ich es nicht mehr weitergeschafft. Es gibt ja so viele Podcasts auf dieser Welt und man kann sie ja nicht alle hören.
for him, because really a lot of people take offense at him being not like a Dale Carnegie character who's always smooth and make sure that everybody likes him. So I really respect that he is willing to take that risk and to be wrong in public and to offend people. And he doesn't do this in any bad way. It's just most people feel, or not all people recognize this. And so I can be much more aggressive with him than I can be with many other people who don't play the same game, because he understands the way and the spirit in which I respond to him.
I think that's a fun and that's a beautiful game. It's ultimately a productive one. Speaking of taking that risk, you tweeted.
Das ist
When you-
übrigens ein Riesending, ne? Also, ich denke, in der Debater-Kultur, insbesondere, ich weiß nicht, wie es in der englischen Twitch-Bubble ist, aber in dieser deutschen Twitch-Bubble ist es einfach nur die Pest. Keiner kann einen Fehler einfach mal zugeben. Alle sind immer bad face, wenn die sich miteinander streiten. Niemand kann irgendwie auch dem anderen nur einen kleinen Punkt rüberreichen. Nichts von all dem ist drin. Die hassen sich von Anfang an und es geht nur darum, besser dazustehen und irgendwie das Social Game zu gewinnen, damit die eigenen Fanboys sich einen drauf abwechseln und die anderen hassen oder so. Das ist komplett, es geht nicht darum, da Dialektik zu betreiben oder irgendwie was Tolles zu machen, sondern es geht nur darum, viele Klicks auf YouTube zu erzeugen mit dem Replay-File und richtig viel Beef zu machen. Das ist das, was aus der Attention Economy, zumindest im deutschen Twitch, was ich beobachten kann, rauskommt. Ne? Ist ein einziger Witz. Und da sozusagen wurde ja jetzt quasi von den beiden erklärt, wie sie miteinander umgehen. Zumindest wie Lee Cronin mit Joscha Bach diskutiert.
You have the choice between being a creator, consumer, or redistributor. Always go for creation. Not only does it lead to a more beautiful world, but also to a much more satisfying life for yourself. And don't get stuck preparing yourself for the journey. The time is always now. So let me ask for advice. What advice would you give on how to become such a creator on Twitter in your own life?
I was very lucky to be alive at the time of the collapse of Eastern Germany and the transition into Western Germany. And me and my friends and most of the people I knew were East Germans, and we were very poor because we didn't have money. And all the capital was in Western Germany, and they bought our factories and shut them down because they were mostly only interested in the market rather than creating new production capacity. And so cities were poor and in disrepair, and we could not afford things. And I could not afford to go into a restaurant and order a meal there. I would have to cook at home. But I also thought, why not just have a restaurant with my friends? So we would open up a cafe with friends and a restaurant, and we would cook for each other in these restaurants and also invite the general public, and they could donate. And eventually this became so big that we could turn this into some incorporated form, and it became a regular restaurant at some point. Or we did the same thing with a movie theater. We would not be able to afford to pay 12 marks to watch a movie, but why not just create our own movie theater and then invite people to pay, and we would rent the movies in the way in which a movie theater does.
Yeah.
And but it would be a community movie theater then, in which everybody who wants to help can watch for free and builds this thing and renovates the building. And so
Und das sind ja im Prinzip die Mechanismen, die auch heute noch sozusagen in den normalen Community-Dingern so ablaufen, ne? Abgesehen jetzt sozusagen vom konkreten, ich wohne hier in einer Wohngemeinschaft, sind viele Sachen genauso organisiert, ne? Also zum Beispiel irgendwie Essen jetzt oder so, wo es halt alles für irgendwie einen schmalen Taler gibt. Oder irgendwie eine Donate-Box irgendwo. Damit auch alle dran teilhaben können, ne? Damit Geld sozusagen kein ausschließender Faktor ist.
ended up creating lots and lots of infrastructure. And I think when you are young and you don't have money, move to a place where this is still happening. Move to one of those places that are undeveloped and where you get a critical mass of other people who are starting to build infrastructure to live in. And that's super satisfying
Ja,
because you're not just creating infrastructure, but you're creating a small society that is.
richtig. Dabei entsteht Kultur, ne? Wenn man einfach sozusagen sich darum kümmert, mit anderen Leuten zusammen diese lebenswichtigen Sachen zu organisieren. Deswegen ist sozusagen die westliche Kultur in dem Sinne, wie wir sie jetzt so zum Beispiel in Deutschland pflegen, komplett Lust. Weil bei uns ist es so, dass zum Beispiel alles, was mit Kindern zu tun hat, kommodifiziert und getrennt ist von dem Rest. Ne? In anderen Kulturen haben die einen viel gesünderen Umgang damit, weil Kinder sind ja ein natürlicher Teil des Lebens. Aber bei uns wird so getan, als müsste man das immer weit weg woanders machen. Und es ergibt überhaupt keinen Sinn. Wir haben keine Kultur, die das vermischt. Oder wenig. Und man merkt aber immer da, wo das geht, wo man das machen kann, wo Kinder zusammen mit dem ganzen anderen Scheiß einfach zusammen existiert. Da geht es allen Leuten auch einfach am besten. Da sind alle cool drauf. Die Leute reißen sich auch zusammen. Die ganzen bescheuerten Wichser, die irgendwie mit 20 mit ihrem Testosteronspiegel nicht klarkommen, reißen sich zusammen und machen ihren Scheiß woanders, weil überall sonst sind ja sozusagen die Kinder auch unterwegs und so. Das ergibt viel mehr Sinn. Und ich beobachte das auch auf Festivals oder so. Wenn da viele Kinder sind, dann ist da ein ganz anderes Feeling. Dann sind die Leute gleich viel entspannter. Und ja, irgendwie, also wir haben sozusagen in Deutschland speziell eine extrem antisoziale Kultur. Einfach. Die hat sich jetzt so etabliert, ne? Und ich sag ja auch immer, ich wäre dafür, dass es irgendwie, dass man sich viel stärker vernetzt mit seinen direkten Nachbarn und versucht da Leben viel besser zu organisieren. Und meine Argumentation ist ja auch, dass es in Zukunft alternativlos sein wird, weil einfach die Armut immer weiter größer wird. Ne? Man kann ja nur noch von Skalierungseffekten profitieren, weil dann sozusagen Leute große Portionen kochen und das irgendwie verteilen, was dann sinnvoller wird, als wenn jeder immer in seiner eigenen Scheißküche alles für sich selber macht, was überhaupt keinen Sinn ergibt. Ne? Es skaliert ja nicht.
Building culture and ways to interact with each other. And that's much, much more satisfying than going into some kind of chain and get your needs met by ordering food from this chain and so on.
So not just consuming culture, but creating
Yes.
culture.
And you don't always have that choice. That's why I prefaced it when you do have the choice. And there are many roles that need to be played. Like we need people who take care of redistribution in society and so on. But when you have the choice to create something, always go for creation. It's so much more satisfying. And it also this is what life is about, I think.
Yeah. Speaking of which, you retweeted this meme of a life of a philosopher in a nutshell. It's birth and death, and in between, it's a chubby guy, and it says, "Why though?"
Yeah.
What do you think is the answer to that?
Well, the answer is that everything that can exist might exist. And in many ways, you take an ecological perspective. The same way as when you look at human opinions and cultures. It's not that there is right and wrong opinions when you look at this from this ecological perspective. But every opinion that fits between two human ears might fit between two human ears. And so when I see a strange opinion on social media, it's not that I feel that I have a need to get upset. It's often more that oh, there you are. And when an opinion is incentivized, then it's going to be abundant. And when you take this ecological perspective also on yourself and you realize you're just one of these mushrooms that are popping up and doing their thing, and you can, depending on where you chose to grow and where you happen to grow, you can flourish or not doing this or that strategy. And it's still all the same life at some level. It's all the same experience of being a conscious being in the world. And you do have some choice about who you want to be more than any other animal has. That to me is fascinating. And so I think that rather than asking yourself, what is the one way to be? Think about what are the possibilities that I have, what would be the most interesting way to be that I can be.
Because everything is possible, so you get to explore
It's not everything is possible. Many things fail. Most things fail. But often there are possibilities that we are not seeing, especially if we choose who we are.
Mhm.
to the degree we can choose. Joscha, you're one of my favorite humans in this world. Consciousness is to merge with for a brief moment of time. It's always an honor. It always blows my mind. It will take me days, if not weeks, to recover. I already miss our chats. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for speaking with me so many times. Thank you so much for all the ideas you put out into the world. And I'm a huge fan of following you now in this interesting, weird time we're going through with AI. So thank you again for talking today.
Thank you, Lex, for this conversation. I enjoyed it very much.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Joscha Bach.
So. Das nächste Mal, wenn wir Joscha Bach gucken, dann gucken wir diesen Campfire-Chat. Ich glaube, das ist ein 4-Stunden-Talk oder so. Der ist aber auf Deutsch. Und der soll richtig toll sein. Den habe ich mir noch nicht reingezogen. Ich habe darauf gewartet, dass wir uns den zusammen im Twitch reinziehen. Das heißt, wenn wir das nächste Mal Joscha Bach-Action machen, dann wird es der sein, bis der leer ist. Ne? Und dann können wir ja einfach weitermachen. Es gibt ja genug interessante Joscha Bach-Talks im Internet, die man gucken kann. Es gibt auch ein paar Deutsche, aber nicht viele. Ja. Ich sag mal so. Jetzt ist es, denke ich, so. Jetzt ist schon aber auch schon Schluss heute auch mal. Ich denke, wir werden irgendwie ist dieses Interface